I want to talk to you about how to lead people to Jesus. I believe that you can be a master soul winner. In order to be the very best soul winner, you should study the life of the greatest soul winner who ever lived. His name was Jesus Christ. Let's look at John chapter 4 in the encounter that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman. John 4, verse 4. It said, "Now Jesus had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour, which means it was noontime. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, 'Will you give me a drink?' His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, 'You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?' For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Jesus, he started a conversation with this woman. And I believe that is the first step to leading people to Jesus, is to start a conversation. If you're not willing to talk to someone new, you'll never be able to lead them to Jesus. And so Jesus was tired. The sun was high in the sky. He sits down by this well, and the Samaritan woman comes, and Jesus just starts a normal conversation with her. He asks her for a drink. The Samaritan woman was very surprised because back then, Jews and Samaritans did not really get along, and it was also very strange that a man would speak to a strange woman that he didn't know. Jesus was willing to step outside of his comfort zone into the life of this woman. You know, each one of us have a comfort zone of friends and family, people that we feel comfortable with. But if we're really going to reach new people for Jesus, we have to step outside of our comfort zone into the life of someone that needs Jesus. We have to keep our eyes open and look for people that need Jesus. You remember the movie Sixth Sense? There was a little boy in that movie, and he said, "I see dead people. They're everywhere." Well, we need to be just like that little boy. We need to see spiritually dead people, because really, they are everywhere. We have to be able to open a conversation with them. Let's look at what Jesus does next. Verse 10, Jesus answered her and said, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." So now Jesus starts talking about living water. What's he doing? He is turning the conversation towards spiritual matters. This is the second step to leading people to Jesus, is to turn the conversation towards God. And so you can start your conversation by talking about the weather, talking about football, talking about the dress you're going to buy at the mall. But then look for an opportunity to start shifting that conversation towards the things of God. And really, there's an opportunity in every conversation to do that. Just recently, I was getting on an airplane, and I sat down in my seat, and a man came down the aisle, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, is this seat next to you saved?" I said, "No, that seat's not saved, but I can tell you how you can be saved." What was I doing? I was turning the conversation towards God. Whatever is inside of you is what is going to come out of you. If you have a water balloon full of water and it gets pricked, what's going to come out? It's water. And so whatever is most important to you is what you're going to talk about. Recently, I saw a grandma, and I sat down next to her, and she started talking to me about her grandkids. She opened up her purse, and she pulled out 17 pictures and showed me the picture of every single grandchild. Why was Grandma talking about her grandkids? Because her grandkids are what was important to her. If Jesus is important to you, then Jesus is what is going to come out of you. If you're full of Jesus and you start talking to someone, you get pricked, then Jesus should start pouring out of you. Look at what happens next. Jesus says to her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she answered. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet." So Jesus had never met this woman before. He didn't know anything about her. But the Holy Spirit gave Jesus some information that helped him in ministering to this woman. This is the third step to leading people to Jesus, is to listen to the Holy Spirit. When you're ministering to someone, You're not on your own. The Holy Spirit is right there with you, helping you, giving you words to say. Jesus didn't know this woman had 5 husbands, but he received what 1 Corinthians chapter 12 would call a word of knowledge about her situation. If you'll listen to the Holy Spirit will give you some information that will help you in ministering to people that need Jesus. The 4th step to leading people to Jesus is to love people. Let's look at what happens next. Verse 20, the Samaritan woman says, "Our fathers worshiped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." And Jesus answers her and says, "God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth." What happens now often happens in many conversations. This woman attempts to start a spiritual argument with Jesus. And I've had lots of people try to start a spiritual argument with me. I start witnessing to them and they start arguing. I discovered that it is my goal not to win arguments. It is my goal to win souls. And I'm the type of person, I like to argue. Sometimes I'm very intellectual. I read lots of books and stuff. And so if people want to argue, I can start throwing out facts and proving them wrong. But I've discovered that I can prove someone wrong, but that does nothing for drawing them to Jesus Christ. Someone said one time, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. This is something I discovered once I got married to my wife, Jessica. Jessica and I, we love each other very much, but when we first got married, we had an argument one day about which restaurant we should go to for our date. And Jessica, she wanted to go to one restaurant, and I wanted to go to another restaurant, and we began to argue, and I started using facts to prove that my choice of restaurant was right. I said, this restaurant is better than your restaurant because it has better prices, it's got better food, it's in a better location, the food comes faster. I ended up winning the argument, and we went to my restaurant, but we ended up having a really horrible date. I would not want to go on that date ever again. My goal in my marriage is not to win arguments with my wife. My goal in my marriage is to love my wife. And I've discovered that the more that I love her, that it doesn't matter what restaurant we go to, as long as she knows she's loved, that we can go to any restaurant and it'll be okay. And the same is true when you're witnessing to people. It doesn't matter whether you win the argument or lose the argument. People will come to God if they know that you love them. Our goal is not to win arguments. Our goal is to win souls. Look at what Jesus does. The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I who speak to you am he." Jesus revealed himself to the woman. And I believe this is the 5th and final step to leading people to God, is to reveal Jesus. Now, just then, the disciples come back, and Jesus begins to lecture them and says, "Guys," he says, "lift up your eyes and look at the fields." They didn't really know what he was talking about. What do you mean the fields? He says, "You think it's 4 more months until the harvest?" And they're looking at the natural field, but Jesus is looking at the spiritual fields. He says, "I tell you, open your eyes and look at the harvest, because they are ripe and ready for harvest right now." You see these 12 disciples, they went into the town and they missed the harvest. As a matter of fact, all 12 of them walked right past this woman who was heading to the well. Not one of them spoke to the woman. They stepped to the other side of the path and just totally ignored her. Then as they were buying their food, that right across the street, there was a crippled man. And they all knew that Jesus healed the crippled, but none of them brought the crippled man back to Jesus. The woman, she runs into the town and she says, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did." And she brings the entire village back to see Jesus. And Jesus spends 2 days there. He heals people, and they meet Jesus, and their lives are changed forever because of this woman's testimony. And this woman, she was a sinner woman. No one in the village liked this woman. Why? Because she had 5 husbands, and the man she's living with now is not her husband. She has stolen half the men in the village. But yet, this sinner woman, she runs in the village, and she brings everyone back to Jesus. This tells me that if you'll find someone who's a sinner, someone who's been running away from God, even someone who has their life all messed up and out of shape, if you'll be be able to spend some time with them, tell them about Jesus, you can change their lives, and potentially you could impact an entire village or town or family, an entire group of people, that person's entire peer group. See, if you can reach just one person for Jesus, you have the potential to change hundreds of lives for eternity. When I preach in different nations, I'll often have crowds from many different religions, and I don't say anything negative about their religion, about their God or their prophet. All I do is lift up Jesus. I begin by telling stories about what Jesus did in the Bible. Then I tell a story about what Jesus has done in my life. Then I share testimonies about what Jesus has done in the life of others. Then I tell the people, this is what Jesus can do for you. And it doesn't matter if the crowd is Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or even atheist. My goal is to make Jesus look so wonderful that when I give the altar call, thousands of people raise their hand and say, yeah, I want to meet this Jesus that you're talking about. My goal is to make Jesus irresistible, to reveal Jesus to people. And so the more people know about Jesus, the more likely they are to come to God. And so this is a great strategy to lead people to Jesus, is by sharing your testimony, telling people what has Jesus done in your life. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. Jesus followed these 5 easy steps in leading this woman to Jesus. First, Jesus started a conversation. Then Jesus turned the conversation towards God. Then he listened to the Holy Spirit. Then Jesus loved the woman. And finally, Jesus revealed himself to the woman. And so you can follow these same 5 steps to lead people to Jesus. Number 1, start a conversation. Number 2, turn the conversation towards God. Number 3, listen to the Holy Spirit. Number 4, love people. And number 5, reveal Jesus. If you'll follow these 5 easy steps, you'll be able to lead many people to Jesus.
To order Daniel's book and become a master soul winner, please call 1-877-431-4276 or visit www.kingministries.com. Order your copy today.